got today. When companies cite the New Zealand-Australia standard or the Australian standard or the so-called strict requirements of global good manufacturing practice, GMP, or the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration review of sunscreen products with no compliance deficiencies in relation to quality, safety and efficacy, when they throw all that information at us, what's going wrong in your view? Is it just odd batches, or it sounds as if they're doing things regularly enough? It's a puzzle, isn't it?
Well, going back to the Therapeutic Goods review of sunscreens, they didn't actually physically test the product. So they did kind of like a desktop review, you'd call it. So they checked that the active ingredients were as per on the label and did a bit of a calculation of whether that should give the desired SPF. But that TGA review did not test as per the Australian New Zealand standard on humans. So that one, I think that's often touted, but that's a little bit different to what we do.
Okay, so in your annual review, what would you want from these companies that would, I know you test their products, but what is your inference from what's being done by them that you want improved?
More regular testing. I mean, obviously some companies don't do any testing at all, and unfortunately because they're not regulated here, they don't have to. There's nothing to stop them making a sunscreen and selling it, which is obviously ridiculous. But more regularly testing. I mean, the ones that are using laboratories and testing to the standard, that's good, but, they need to be doing it more than 5 years. I mean, sometimes we get test reports that are 5 years old, and, I mean, a lot can happen in 5 years. And, we think these companies are making a lot of money out of sunscreens, and they should be regularly testing.
Good to talk to you. Thank you for that. Belinda Castles, testing writer at Consumer New Zealand. I have no idea why it's done this, but this is getting publicity. A company named Vitamin Water has announced a no phone for a year contest. It's obviously a gimmick, but I presume they'll have to pay out $100,000 paid to someone who can survive a year without using a smartphone. An old-fashioned ding-a-ling phone is okay, and I think someone's going to be chosen. Could you do it? No. Survive a year without a smartphone?
No.
I couldn't and work the way I do at the moment, no.
All right. Would you do it for $100,000?
No.
It still wouldn't be worth it?
No.
I don't think it would for me either.
I struggled to go for a day. I left my phone behind one day when I went on a trip out of town, and I struggled. I tried to find a payphone, and I couldn't find just one of your old telecom phones in the street somewhere. I tried to find one of those, and then I realised they don't take coins when I did find one, and had to buy a card. And so, no, I couldn't do it.
But once upon a time you could.
Oh, once upon a time, yeah, definitely. If the payphone was around and I could go and even do a collect call if I had to. But no, I don't think I could nowadays, no.
Okay.
No, I certainly wouldn't choose to. I've got a bit of an anxiety curve, I think, when I have lost my phone or you can't get reception, you're somewhere and you want to be working or phoning someone. And then after a while it goes. And if you've got no reception at all, it's actually quite...
unnerving.
Unnerving, but then it becomes a bit of a relief, and you can relax.
But that's interesting because it suggests, not that we've got time to explore this, but it suggests that we're all kind of psychologically wedded to our phones beyond
it's scary.
It is scary.
Like the young people.
Just like those young people. Scott Campbell, lovely to see you.
Kia ora, you too, Jim.
And Heather Roy, thank you so much for your company.
Thank you, Jim.
We are back tomorrow and we're standing by for Checkpoint. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, a teenager who was sentenced to home detention for killing a 15-year-old cyclist in a hit-and-run accident claims she's now the target of death threats. More than 100,000 people have signed an online petition asking for the Crown to appeal the sentence. It's thinking about it. A new low for New Zealand. For the first time, a man has been charged with human trafficking and slavery. It's alleged the Samoan national has been bringing agricultural workers to the Hawke's Bay for more than 2 decades, not paying them and allegedly subjecting them to physical assaults. 2 people have been killed in a light plane crash at Raglan, and Christmas comes early in Oz. An 84-year-old Kiwi-born grandmother survives in the Aussie outback.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. 2 people have died in a light plane crash in Raglan. The fire service says the plane crashed into the harbour near East Street, just to the south of the town centre, about 3:20. Rowan Quinn reports.
A nearby resident, Ted Glynn, says he heard an almighty bang that sounded like a big truck crashing. He can't see the plane from his house, but has heard ambulance and fire sirens. The police say there were no other people in the plane and no injuries on the ground. A fire service spokesperson says emergency service workers have been able to access the plane on foot. The harbour master has offered the use of a crane to clear the wreckage. Ko Rowan Quinn, DNA.
A Samoan national charged with 18 counts of human trafficking and slavery over a 23-year period in Hawke's Bay can now be named as Viliamu Samu. The 64-year-old orchard worker from Camberley, Hastings, appeared in the Hastings District Court this morning following a 2-year investigation by Immigration New Zealand and the police. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley.
Court documents show Mr Samu is charged with using 10 people as slaves between 1994 and 2017. He's also facing a further 8 charges of arranging the entry of people from Samoa into New Zealand by deceiving them between 2003 and 2017. It's the first time anyone's been simultaneously charged with both human trafficking and slavery, and has been described by Immigration NZ as a new low. Victims say Mr Samu closely controlled and monitored their movements, and he's believed to have promised people well-paid jobs. He was granted bail and will appear in the Napier High Court next month. Ko Anusha Bradley Aho.
Anxiety and depression are growing causes of truancy and non-enrolment in school. Attendance Services has told the Education Ministry it's seeing an increase in mental health problems among young people, and that's affecting their education. Carol Puklowski from Auckland City Education Services says it's hard to get help for students who refuse to go to school because of mental health problems.
The capacity to respond to that is just not there, and if you've got a young person who's hiding in the bedroom and doesn't want to get out, and if help can't come to the house, it becomes really hard to try and get the right support in place. So mental wellness is becoming really a huge reason for what we're dealing with.
Carol Puklowski says the problem is affecting children as young as 12 years old. A lawyer who left the profession after suffering harassment by male colleagues says women are still being pestered every day. In March, the Law Society tasked a working group with investigating the profession in the wake of the sexual assault and bullying scandal. Dame Sylvia Cartwright chaired the group, which released a 130-page report today. It recommends changes such as clearer codes of conduct. Former lawyer Olivia Wensley says change can't happen quickly enough.
I want things to happen sooner rather than later because I'm extremely alarmed. I'm continually contacted by women in the profession who are experiencing this behaviour every day.
Former litigation lawyer Olivia Wensley. The Ngāpuhi leader iwi have voted overwhelmingly against a treaty settlement proposal offered by the government. The Treaty Negotiations Minister Andrew Little says 51% of Ngāpuhi voted to support the evolved mandate proposal, well short of the 75% majority needed. The voter turnout was 19.3%. Of the Hapu vote, 73 voted against the proposal and 31 were in favour. The main objection to the proposal has been a single commercial settlement controlled by a central negotiating body, which many Hapu fear will be dominated by the Ngāpuhi Runanga leader, Sonny Tau. Christmas has come early for a New Zealand family after an amazing tale of survival in Western Australia's Great Southern region. 3 days after she went missing, 84-year-old Patricia Byrne from Whangamata has been found alive after getting lost in the bush. The great-grandmother was helping family members maintain walking tracks in Western Australia's Stirling Range National Park when she went missing. Inspector Jeff Dixon, who led the search for Ms Byrne, says the officers who found her couldn't believe their eyes.
They found her stepping out of the bush. It was just elation that erupted throughout the whole search effort because after 4 days, there was just that feeling that was she going to make it?
Jeff Dixon says Ms Byrne was dehydrated and emotional and is now recovering in hospital. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the Black Caps opener Tom Latham has become the 15th New Zealander to score a Test double century. Latham's 200 against Sri Lanka in the first Test at the Basin Reserve in Wellington came off 412 deliveries and took him 9.5 hours to compile. A short time ago, he was still at the wicket, unbeaten on 245 with the Black Caps 548 for 8. Meanwhile, in Perth, Australia's 168 for 4 in their second innings of the second Test against India, an overall lead of 211. The New Zealand driver Brendan Hartley says he has several options for 2019 after being dropped from Formula One. And after just one full season with Toro Rosso, Hartley has lost his seat for next season. The 29-year-old, who's back in New Zealand, says while he won't be back in Formula One in 2019, he's still hopeful of a return one day, but has options in the meantime.
Stranger things have happened in Formula One, including me getting the shot this year. So yeah, let's see. We never know what happens. I'm going to try and keep the foot in the door in Formula One, but also looking at other projects as well and what I'll be racing next year. Nothing's been fully confirmed yet, but there's a few irons in the fire and I'm still confident things will work out.
Brendan Hartley. Dan Carter has capped his maiden season in Japanese rugby by claiming the top league's Most Valuable Player award. The former All Blacks first five helped guide the Kobe Steelers to their first title in 14 years, kicking 5 conversions and a penalty in their 55-5 win over Suntory in the final. That's the news.
Is speed the problem?
I'm warning you now, you drive at 105 on the open road and we get you, you're going to get a ticket.
Are men the problem in the Ngāpuhi settlement?
You know, a leader in the boardroom does not necessarily translate to a good leader amongst the people.
And a communication problem for flood-hit homeowners in Piha.
I've written to the Mayor, I've written to the CEO of Auckland Council, who coincidentally was the CEO of Tauranga Council, who had similar issues.
Always listen to Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, how New Zealand is measuring up on reducing its waste mountain. Associate Environment Minister Eugenie Sage fronts up. And after 10, Fonterra's new Chief Financial Officer Mark Rivers on turning the ship around after its worst ever financial result. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty, the central high country, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Mostly fine, isolated showers mainly about the ranges, clearing this evening, but returning tomorrow afternoon and evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy periods, mainly morning and night. But Nelson and Marlborough, fine. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine today. Rain spreading north tomorrow with brief heavy falls about eastern Otago, but only patchy falls further north. Northwest gales in exposed places from the Canterbury high country southwards tomorrow. Bulla, mainly fine today, scattered showers tomorrow, turning to rain in the evening. Westland, cloud increasing with drizzle developing this evening. Rain spreading north tomorrow, heavy for a time. Fiordland, drizzle turning to rain this evening. Heavy falls tomorrow, easing in the afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. And we're with you until 6 this evening. The lawyer for a teenager who was sentenced to home detention for killing a 15-year-old cyclist in a hit-and-run accident claims her client is now the target of death threats. Roulette LaRue was drinking and smoking cannabis and speeding before she hit Nathan Kratzkov on Auckland's North Shore in May this year. Last week, she was sentenced to home detention, 250 hours of community work, and was disqualified from driving for 2.5 years. Now, the sentence has caused a public outcry with more than 100,000 people signing online a petition there to ask for the sentence to be appealed. Belinda Sellers, QC, is LaRue's lawyer. I asked her if Home D and community service is what a life is worth these days.
Well, it's not so much what is a life worth, it's what actually happened here, and it was an accident.
Pure and simple, in your view?
Well, certainly my client made some very bad decisions and, you know, it wasn't blameless by any means. She pleaded guilty at a very early opportunity to dangerous driving causing death. But equally, what happened was she was a young woman in a car with two other young men. She had had some alcohol and some cannabis earlier in the night. She was a learner driver. Those two things are very much not in her favour. She took a wrong turning off the motorway, and then she went too fast for an intersection. She was going 11 k's too fast.
Yeah, so she was speeding. She had consumed alcohol when, for her age, there's zero tolerance for behind the wheel.
Absolutely.
Learner driver's licence, as you say. And she didn't immediately take responsibility for her actions. In fact, she just went home.
Well, not quite, because, well, first of all, she was passing on a green light. So the victim was actually crossing on a controlled intersection, and it was red for pedestrians. She didn't see him and she hit him, and immediately she slowed down. But the boys in the car, the owner of the car, they said, no, you can't stop here, hurry up. And she continued on, and then it got too much for her because she thought she had hit something, and she pulled over. And after that, she was basically a mess, and they took over the driving while she was in the back of the car.
But obviously information in the public domain is that she went home eventually. Her mother didn't say, let's go to the police station now. Her mother says, go to bed, have a rest. They take the car to the panel beaters the next day before they turn up at the police station to explain what's happened. That does not, in a lot of people's minds, scream remorse.
Well, I think it's important here to realise that she was actually not functioning very well at all at this point. She had a reaction, and she was basically following what other people were telling her to do. When she did get to the station, she was completely open with the police. And whilst the person they went to see was a panel beater, it was actually a friend of the family who they were looking for some advice from.
Still, advice about fixing the car. Does she understand how...
about everything in general, really. That was just a very small part of it.
Does she understand how grotesque some of her social media posts may seem to Nathan's parents? The post of her in the orange prison suit with the garish face paint and the tag, hide your children, the video of her outside Mount Eden jail, the joking about no licence. Does she understand how grotesque that must be for the parents of Nathan?
She does now, and I think it's important that the Halloween post, at the time, she wasn't thinking, and she certainly wasn't thinking about this. She's very clear about that. The other posts, she's actually somebody who's had come out of a very troubled relationship, and being outside Mount Eden prison had absolutely nothing to do with this case. It's not somewhere that she would ever be sent as a woman anyway.
It's about the way it looks, though, isn't it? It's about perception. And the perception is that she, well, at no point seems to understand or appreciate the seriousness of what she has done.
Well, I think that's where the information before the judge, I mean, it's one thing for us to look at what somebody posts, and particularly we're talking about a young person, and interpret it in a certain way. It's another thing to actually hear the person and understand what's going on in their head, and have them speak to you face to face.
So do you truly believe she's remorseful?
Absolutely.
So do you think she has got lucky with sentencing, or do you think that someone from a different family background would have got the same kind of sentence that she did?
She does not come from a privileged background at all. That's one of the things that's been posted that is completely wrong. She comes from a troubled background, and that was referred to by the judge. So this is not a story about race or about privilege at all. It's about when you measure her actual culpability, her guilt of what occurred that night, when you compare it to other cases that are similar, and when you look at her situation and what's going to help not only her but society in general, it's the right result.
So what's she doing at the moment? She sitting home watching Netflix and on social media and just having all access to everything that she would normally inside the house?
On Saturday night there were people outside the house threatening to kill her. She's been receiving death threats by social media, so she's not at home relaxing.
So were the police called to that incident?
They were. And
what's happened as a consequence?
I believe that nobody's been arrested, but that there might have been trespass notices issued.
OK, so as you'll be aware, there's a petition out there, more than 100,000 people now saying that she should be sent to jail rather than the sentence that she's got. It now appears that the file's going to be reconsidered. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's perfectly proper that it has been sent in a situation like this for Crown Law to consider. But one of the concerns about what's been on social media is so much of it is ill-informed. That's why we have a justice system that's part of a civilised society, that somebody can take a look at this with all of the facts and impartially consider it.
So do people just need to butt out and leave it to the judge then?
Absolutely.
That is Belinda Sellers, QC, and she's the lawyer for Roulé Le Roux. The Crown says it is considering an appeal in that case against the sentence. This afternoon, the court made available Judge Nicola Mather's sentencing notes in this case. A couple of important points there. The judge says that she has given particular care in considering Le Roux's childhood, her troubled childhood. She notes that Le Roux had various mental disorders requiring treatment, and that very shortly after the event she was hospitalised, and that is she is responding positively for treatment and is engaged with community drug and alcohol services. She also says the judge accepts Le Roux's remorse as genuine, and as well as home detention and community service, she has imposed judicial monitoring, which means that Le Roux will be monitored not only by probation services but also the judge herself, and that Le Roux will have to go back before the court and the judge will track her progress too. So those were from the District Court Judge's notes, Nicola Mather's, and they're available online if anyone wants to read the whole 8 pages, I think it is, with the reasons for that particular sentence. Police say 2 people are believed to have been killed in a light plane crash at Raglan. The crash happened just before 3:30 this afternoon. Our reporter Andrew McRae is in Raglan and joins us now. Hi Andrew, what can you tell us about what's happened?
Yeah, hi Lisa. Actual details of how the plane crashed we're not sure about, although a few local people I've spoken to when I arrived here did say, while not seeing it crash, they certainly heard a bang just around about 3:15. And the plane has come down on what at the moment is sand flats on the edge of the harbour, but once the tide comes in, of course, it'll be covered with water. So they're moving quite quickly at the moment. There's a large number of emergency service personnel down there, sort of on a hill looking down, and it looks like they may be at some point shortly taking the 2 bodies that we believe were on board, taking those from the aircraft before the tide rises. And then there's the question of how they may recover the plane. The local harbour master has offered his vessel to help with that recovery, but they're concentrating at the moment on recovering the bodies, and they will then take them from the plane up on a paddock on the far side of where I am at the moment. There's a lot of emergency vehicles up there at the moment, and once that happens, well, it could be quite a slow process. It's a very small-looking yellow plane, maybe a 2-seater, possibly bigger. Most of it's covered with tarpaulin at the moment, so it's very difficult to see. And this part of the harbour, not terribly far from the Raglan airfield, so it's hard to know whether it was attempting to land or was had just taken off. There are some reports, unsubstantiated, that there was some smoke seen from the plane, but we don't know that for sure.
Thank you very much. That's Andrew McRae joining us from just outside of the crash site there, where the small plane has gone down. Believed to be 2 people have been killed in that crash. It's been described as a new low for New Zealand. A human trafficking and slavery case involving at least 10 people brought to work in the Hawke's Bay horticultural industry. A 64-year-old Samoan national has been charged with 18 counts of human trafficking and slavery over a period of more than 20 years. He's been named as Viliamu Samu, an orchard worker from Hastings. I asked Immigration New Zealand's chief investigator, Peter Devoy, how his alleged victims were treated.
They have been brought here on visitor visas. They have been mistreated, they haven't been paid, and their plight has been sufficient to support those charges of slavery and people trafficking, which I suggest is a bit of a new low to New Zealand.
When you say they were mistreated, in what way? Physically mistreated? Is that the allegation?
That's the allegation. There's physical physical mistreatments by way of assaults and also threats. So what comes through here is that migrants in general who come to New Zealand, they're in a vulnerable situation. They quite often don't understand or read English. They aren't fully conversant in the spoken language. So they are in a situation where they have the information that they receive and their situation is very much or can be a controlled situation, and this is what we're seeing in exploitation in New Zealand at the moment.
How did this go on for so long?
It's a matter where people probably didn't report it to us. Some people must have been suspicious around the plight of some of these people, and it came to our attention about 2 years ago, which initiated the investigation that has culminated in the charges today. But that was brought about by one of our staff, a compliance officer, speaking to a person who had been presented to us as requiring or needing to be deported from New Zealand, and recognising that something wasn't right and asking further questions. And
so not wanting to be unfair to you guys, Mr. Devoy, but basically it was stumbled across through during the course of another kind of investigation.
Yeah, it was discovered by way of a deportation that extra questions were asked.
So have people been complicit in this? Because you said there some people might have suspected some of these workers were being mistreated. Have some business operators or others been complicit in keeping this quiet?
I mean, the full facts will come out in due course, but they probably haven't been complicit. They've probably been seeing a situation which they just haven't raised or asked further questions about.
So these are contract workers, are they? This gentleman brought them in here and then got them working for other companies, is that correct?
Yeah, this is a situation where they are working on contract, or they're presented as contract workers to a larger contractor who again might be second or third tier contracting.
So only one other contractor?
Again, the detail as to who they work for I haven't got, and we won't be going into.
But the point about that is, did the contractor not ask any questions about these people's right to work in New Zealand and the way they were being treated?
We've got the situation where whose responsibility it is to ask these questions is somewhat vague, and it is probably something we need to look at.
So what about the people, the so-called slaves? Where are they now?
They are in New Zealand, some of them, and others have returned to Samoa.
And the ones in New Zealand, do they have the right to continue staying here, or are they here for the case?
Again, their visa situations I won't discuss, or their current situations I won't discuss, but they will be lawfully in New Zealand.
Okay, so before you go, how widespread do you think this kind of problem is? Are we some kind of safe haven for modern day slavery and human trafficking?
I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but this is now our fourth prosecution for people trafficking. It's the first one that police have led with us. It's the first time that we've had a combination of charges from of alleging slavery and people trafficking. And people trafficking is the pinnacle of exploitation, and we're certainly seeing more exploitation in the country. We're certainly seeing more people trafficking. We've got 2 charges now before the court, and we've laid people trafficking charges in 4 situations. So it is becoming more mainstream in New Zealand, and this is probably, the charges we see today are probably a new low for New Zealand.
And that is Peter Devoy, the Chief Investigator for Immigration New Zealand there. You're listening to Checkpoint. It is 24 after 5. And just an update on Black Cap, Tom Latham's spell on day 3 of their first test against Sri Lanka. A short time ago, Latham cracked a quarter of a century, with the Black Caps sitting on 574 for 9 at the Basin Reserve. After more than 11 hours at the crease, Latham is now on 264 not out, and Trent Boult has 11 runs. A New Zealand family is celebrating what they've called the best ever Christmas present after an amazing tale of survival in Western Australia's Great Southern region. Their 84-year-old mother, grandmother and great-grandmother was found alive after spending 3 days missing and alone in the bush. Annika Smith reports.
Patricia Byrne is no stranger to Western Australia's Stirling Range National Park. The 84-year-old, who hails from Whangamata, has religiously visited family in the area for the past 20 years, but disappeared on Thursday. She'd been helping family members maintain walking tracks to the north of her family property, above the town of Albany. The family said she fell behind after stopping to rest. After hours of searching, they raised the alarm with the police, and a large ground and air search was launched, involving almost 70 emergency volunteers and police. Inspector Jeff Dixon, who was in charge of the search and rescue efforts, said she was finally spotted yesterday morning, around 4 kilometres from where she was last seen. He said they couldn't believe their eyes.
2 police officers from one of our local police stations were out on an interior road that circles through the national park as part of our containment patrols, and they found her stepping out of the bush. It was just elation that erupted throughout the whole search effort, because after 4 days, there was just that feeling that, was she going to make it?
Miss Byrne was only wearing a light shirt and had no food or water. Mr. Dixon said on the first 2 days she was missing, temperatures climbed to 37 degrees and dropped to 11 degrees with rain and thunderstorms overnight. He said it's believed she stayed alive by sheltering from the conditions and drinking puddle water. Her grandson, Blair Coatsworth, said the family never gave up hope.
She's probably the hardest 84-year-old you'd know. She'd take on a gang of people, that woman. And to hear she came out the way she did was sort of what you'd expect from her, eh?
Mr. Coatsworth said finding out his grandmother had been found safe and well was the best news ever.
Man, we're feeling really, really happy, eh? All the Kiwis would understand the term tūmeki. We are just really excited. We expected the police officer walked over to us, and we thought we were getting the worst of the worst. And then he just hit us with the best lotto we could ever happen or have for Christmas, mate. Eh? That's the best Christmas present ever.
Jeff Dixon said it was incredible Miss Byrne had survived.
She's a strong old chook that to be able to hold out for those 4 days in those varied weather conditions, there's something going on inside her that you and I probably don't have.
Mr. Dixon said Miss Byrne, who was found dehydrated and emotional, is now recovering in hospital. The police will meet her and her family in the coming days to determine just how she got lost and how she survived. For Checkpoint, this is Annika Smith.
The security bill to protect Department of Conservation staff from harassment and abuse has reached $1 million. But DOC says even that doesn't reflect the full cost of what they're dealing with. Graphic death threats and online abuse reached a tipping point several months ago when DOC put nearly $300,000 into protecting staff during an anti-1080 hikoi to Parliament. Forest and Bird says it's outrageous that DOC's being forced to spend time and money keeping its staff safe with extremist protesters distracting them from their core conservation work. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Reviewing the long list of threats made to DOC staff over the past 15 months makes for grim reading. Threats to shoot down DOC helicopters and skin the faces of staff. The Prime Minister, Conservation Minister and Agricultural Minister have become targets. A letter was delivered to DOC's New Plymouth office with a blue substance leaking out of it, and in the South Island, a DOC worker's details were published online with comments around filling him with lead and needing good snipers in New Zealand. Roger Lorigan runs a pest control company which carries out 1080 drops. One of his sites was targeted by vandals earlier this year. They let 2,000 litres of helicopter fuel out onto the forest floor.
Plus, they kept the helicopter buckets
tried to wreck trucks and did damage to trucks. Worked out about $50,000, $60,000 worth of damage that was done just in that night.
He says the anti-1080 sentiment has ramped up over the past 18 months, but he's committed to the cause.
I've been dealing with 1080 for a long time, and I'm a mad 10 hunter as well, so I sort of see it from both sides. But if you're going to do a job, and when you look at New Zealand's threatened species and its bush, pretty spectacular thing to try and save. And 1080 works. There's no ifs, buts and maybes, and it doesn't do all the damage that people say it does.
Over the past 2 years, DOC has spent nearly $800,000 on security for aerial 1080 drops and another $300,000 in recent months as a result of increasing threats and harassment. That includes covering security guards to work in remote locations where the 1080 drops happen and paying up to 30 DOC staff to monitor the situation during a recent anti-1080 hikoi to Parliament. Forest and Birds Chief Executive Kevin Haig says it's infuriating DOC has to divert money away from conservation.
This is money that should have been available for the vital task of protecting our nature, and to have it diverted in order that DOC staff and contractors can be safe from these awful people is just absolutely frustrating.
He says the irrational behaviour of the anti-1080 brigade was highlighted last week when autopsy results revealed a dead weka, which was used during a protest, had likely been shot with a .22 rifle.
These extremist anti-1080 protesters are just completely beyond reason. They don't use actual evidence in anything that they say, and that they are immune. Their arguments are immune to evidence and the rules of logic that most people would apply.
DOC spokesperson Nick John says they've been working with police to manage this situation. That's resulted in 4 warnings, 4 arrests and 1 conviction so far. He says it's unfortunate money is being spent on security when staff are operating legally and in the interests of promoting conservation.
I don't think that anybody should be subjected to the harassment and threats that our staff have. There's not many workplaces would tolerate this, and we've done so for too long.
2019 is predicted to be a huge year for pests due to bumper seed fall from beech trees. Mr John says while he encourages conversation around conservation, he's hopeful the new year will bring a more reasonable approach to the 1080 discussion. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
And just an update on the Black Caps. They've just been bowled out for 478. Tom Latham finished on 264, not out. Yay, says Katrina, the 6th highest New Zealand Test score. But coming up, should a council charge rates if you can't live in your house? Confidence that Mycoplasma bovis can be eradicated. And the Law Society Working Group releases its report into harassment and inappropriate behaviour. We would love your feedback. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But here's Katrina.
Do email or text Lisa Cricket feedback. She'll love that, love that. 2 people have died in a light plane crash in Raglan. The plane crashed into the harbour near East Street, just to the south of the town centre this afternoon. The plane crashed into shallow water and emergency workers were able to walk out to the wreckage. A Samoan man charged with 18 counts of human trafficking and slavery over a 23-year period in Hawke's Bay has been named as Viliamu Samu. The 64-year-old orchard worker from Hastings has appeared in court following a 2-year investigation. Court documents show Mr Samu is charged with using 10 people as slaves between 1994 and 2017. Crown Law may appeal the sentence of a woman who killed a young cyclist in a hit-and-run crash. 19-year-old Rule LaRue hit and killed 15-year-old Auckland cyclist Nathan Kratzkoff in May after drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana. Her lawyer Belinda Sellers QC has told Checkpoint LaRue is very remorseful and has had death threats on social media and violent abuse from people outside her house. Anxiety and depression are growing causes of truancy and non-enrolment in school. Attendance Services has told the Education Ministry it's seeing an increase in mental health problems among young people and that's affecting their education. The Auckland City Education Services says the problem is affecting children as young as 12 years old and it's hard to get help for students who refuse to go to school. New Zealand have been dismissed for 578 in their first innings of the first cricket test against Sri Lanka in Wellington, giving them a 296-run lead. Opener Tom Latham batted throughout the innings and finished on 264 not out, the sixth highest test score by a New Zealander. The government's advisory group on M. bovis says it's confident it's on track to eradicate the disease. More than 30 farms are currently infected, with another 50 having been cleared. A technical advisory group says it's now more optimistic than it was 6 months ago, with only one relatively recent incursion. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6. Well, I'm not. I'm back on the radio at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's go to business now with Nona Pelsier, who is, if you're listening on radio, against a backdrop of our beautiful Christmas tree here in the studio.
Very sparkly in here.
Very sparkly. Mercury has sold its smart metering business. So what does that mean?
Well, they have a company called Matrix. It's a company that's about 5% of their overall business, and it's separate from Mercury. It's a company that provides smart meters to consumers and business customers. Now, their customers are actually retail companies, so power retailers, gentailers like Mercury. And Mercury is going to continue to be a customer of this Matrix. It's not core to their business, so they felt quite confident in selling it. Time was right. There's a company called IntelliHub Group. It's owned by some Australians, and it's moving into New Zealand, so the time was right to sell. And they sold it for $270 million, which is, quite a good number. Now, unfortunately, it's also going to cut their revenue and so underlying profit by $28 million a year. Now, that didn't really sit that well with the investors, and their share price actually fell 0.5% today by 2 cents to $3.53. And that's in a day when our market kind of rose a little bit, had a stronger finish to the day. Now, let's see, the share price had dropped by, no, that's their set, sorry. We had a stronger end. We rose 0.25%, up 23 points to 8,746, which is interesting because we'd been down most of the day. But Asia's looking a little bit more confident today, probably because the U.S. market hasn't opened yet. Just saying. Anyways, our currency is steady at 67.9 US cents, 94.6 Australian, and 54 pounds.
Thank you, Nona. And we're going down south now. Should a council charge rates for an uninhabitable house with no services? And that's the question Christchurch homeowner Nikki Ross is asking after she says the council threatened her with legal action and debt collectors if she didn't front up with $2,600 in rates for a property she's not been able to live in. Checkpoint first met Nikki Ross earlier this year after EQC admitted 2 botched attempts at fixing her Woolston home, which had a garden growing through the floorboards. The property finally sold today, and whilst her 8-year battle with EQC might have come to an end, Nikki told our Christchurch video journalist Logan Church she was at her wits' end with the Christchurch City Council.
Today we have sold the property as is, where is, for just less than land value, so it is no longer our responsibility. It is gone. It is done. We are finished.
Today has been 8 years in the making for Nikki Ross. She has finally sold her earthquake-damaged Woolston home, as is where is, for about $130,000. But calling it a home is a somewhat generous description. Following 2 botched EQC repairs, the property was left gutted, weeds growing through the floor in her lounge.
We had an initial repair in 2013 that was a faulty repair. That was discovered about 6 weeks after we moved back into the property. And then they tried to repair it again back in 2016, and it was a completely failed repair. That took them nearly 2 years to admit it was a failed repair, so the house was uninhabitable.
In February this year, EQC admitted to Checkpoint the house should have been rebuilt from the start and offered a settlement. All was well, until Nikki heard the Christchurch City Council wanted $2,600 in rates for this year. That's on top of roughly $7,500 she's already paid over the previous 3 years.
I just felt destroyed, to be honest, Logan. It's been such a battle with them, and this is after advising the council back in 2016 that the house was uninhabitable, was no longer, shouldn't have been classed as a house. This was after telling the council in February that the house had been written off by the insurance company and EQC, that we were still hit with full rates on a completely uninhabitable house with no services.
An empty house with no water, sewage, electricity or rubbish collections for 4 of the last 8 years, but she still charged ever-increasing rates.
They've said that it's not the City Council's problem to issue rates values, so just a collection for it, so that the value of the house is done by QV. So whatever QV comes at is what the council will charge you, and there is no rebate available for anybody who has inhabited their house from the 22nd of February. You had to have it been uninhabitable from the day of the quake.
After trying to explain on the phone and by email that no one lived or could live in the house, she's given up and will pay it. After 8 years, she just wants to move on. But she says the council needs to make drastic changes to its own rules to help out homeowners less financially fortunate than her.
I think the council's dealt with it exceptionally bad. I think their policy along the house has to be uninhabitable from the date of the major earthquake is significantly flawed, because there's been people that were maybe in the house for a year or so living in a severely earthquake-damaged house that then, through no fault of their own, through faulty repairs or bad decisions by the government, EQC, the houses have been uninhabitable. So there's a massive flaw in the system relating to the rates rebates. You know, absolutely, we've always said that we've had to pay rates on the section or to a value of what the house is, but not to a value on an uninhabitable house that's actually been written off since February.
The Christchurch City Council has not yet responded to requests for comments. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
A new report into Mycoplasma bovis says good progress is being made controlling the infection and eradication is feasible. However, the technical advisory group says the response will need to continue for some time and that, quote, social licence is important to ensure M. bovis can be successfully eradicated. Jeff Gwynn is MPI's Director of Response and he joins us now on the phone. Good evening.
Good evening, Lisa. How are you?
Very well, thank you. What does social licence mean in this case?
Oh, look, I think it's the willingness of farmers to continue to do the right thing to support the response, and obviously the wider public's at least knowledge of the response and that it's tracking in the right direction. After all, it's taxpayers' money we're spending.
So you need the farmers to cooperate, basically, to make it happen?
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's critical to all of us, particularly our partners, Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb. If the farmers are unable to support the response, then, and to be honest, we can't do it from an office in Wellington.
Is there any suggestion that they're not supporting you in any way?
No, nothing that I've seen, Lisa. I think the farmers, I've seen vast improvements in NAIC compliance, for example. I'd use as one indicator, and every farmer I've met wants to do the right thing here.
So in terms of NAIC compliance, so this is tracking stock movements when cows are passed from one farm to another. Breaking the rules around that, animal tracking, is a large part of the reason why we've kind of got ourselves into this mess, isn't it? So I wonder, how many infringement notices have you issued for not following animal movement rules?
Look, I think the number sits around 100, but I think what's more important is there's been a large number of warnings given in relation to non-compliance, where farmers have had the opportunity to actually firstly be aware of what their obligations are, and in the main they've all taken that on board and corrected their actions. So I think that's encouraging.
Okay, so 100 notices, but how many warnings have you given out?
Oh, look, I think the number, it's actually Osprey that gives out those warnings, and I think it is in the vicinity of several hundred now.
Okay, so how confident are you that they're compliant now with stock movements?
Oh, look, I think, in my view, is compliance is improving. It's still not 100%, but the other point I'd make is if we didn't have NAIT, we wouldn't have even embarked on this exercise. So if we didn't have NAIT, we would never have got out of the starting gate. So it's a double-edged sword. It has helped us to do this, but it's also in some instances hindered it.
So you said it's not at 100%, so where do you think it's sitting then?
Oh, look, if I was to estimate, I think it's probably... It's actually in a couple of places. Firstly, in terms of animal movements to the works, I think the compliance is sitting in the high 90s. Between farm, my estimation would be in the vicinities of 70 to 80%. I think some area that could still do with improvement is the movement of calves, for example. But again, there's a large amount of work going on by both Osprey and legislative change to improve the system and the compliance with the system.
This report confirms that you're tracking a single strain, so no other infection, right? It's a single one. That's got to make it easier to find the source, doesn't it? So where are you at with that?
In terms of the source, we continue investigations into the source. We still have no more evidence than I had some months ago to tell you in terms of us being able to isolate a pathway. It's rare in these circumstances for us to find the smoking gun. But
so are you never going to find? Are you never going to find the source? Is that the realistic outcome, that the source will never be found?
Well, look, I'm not prepared to say that at the moment because we still have ongoing compliance investigations and technical investigations into the source. So we're certainly continuing to lift every stone. Whether or not we find it, obviously, until those investigations are complete, I'm not really able to comment.
And before you go, how many compensation claims outstanding?
Look, I think we've paid some $37 million against an assessed value of $44 million, and I think the good news from our perspective is we've paid some $7 million over the last 4 weeks. So it's certainly our pace at getting the claims out the door has improved exponentially in the last 6 months.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's Jeff Gwynn, who is the the Director of Response for MPI, and that's on the Mycoplasma bovis infection. Clearer conduct are among the changes being mooted by a working group set up in the aftermath of the sexual assault and bullying allegations that have rocked the legal profession. In March, the Law Society tasked the group, chaired by Dame Sylvia Cartwright, with looking at the process for reporting and taking action on harassment and inappropriate behaviour. Its 130-page report released today has found a range of problems with the current regime. Our reporter, Sarah Robson, has the details.
The working group's chair, Dame Sylvia Cartwright, says they have recommended a complete overhaul of the way the Law Society deals with complaints around sexual harassment, bullying and discrimination.
While entirely appropriate for consumer-based concerns such as my lawyer charged me too much or didn't do a very good job or matters of that nature, are quite inappropriate for more sensitive issues such as sexual harassment, violence, bullying and discrimination.
The working group has recommended new rules be put in place that require higher personal and professional standards of lawyers, but also wants a prohibition on victimisation of people who report unacceptable behaviour in good faith. But Dame Sylvia Cartwright says the changes have to go beyond that.
The major task, though, for the Law Society is to encourage the whole profession to change its culture, so that the extremely embarrassing level of discrimination, bullying and sexual harassment and violence is sharply reduced.
The Law Society's president, Catherine Beck, says they've accepted the working group's recommendations and it's now working on making the necessary changes. But she hopes messages about what is inappropriate and unprofessional conduct are already getting through.
We would hope that actually, as a result of a lot of education, communication and media coverage over the last few months, that people are now aware of what is expected of them and what amounts to unprofessional conduct. Nevertheless, we need to have clarity in our regulations.
Former lawyer Olivia Wensley says it's taken the Law Society a long time to get to this point.
I want things to happen sooner rather than later because I'm extremely alarmed. I'm continually contacted by women in the profession who are experiencing this behaviour every day.
Olivia Wensley says now it's up to the Law Society to actually press ahead and make the necessary changes.
I'm glad that what needs to desperately be done is now there in black and white print. It's been like getting blood out of a stone, getting the Law Society to actually acknowledge that change is desperately needed.
But Catherine Beck has defended the time it's taken the Law Society to respond to the issues exposed by the Russell McVeigh scandal.
We've acted pretty quickly, I think, once the full extent of the problems faced by the Law Society became really well known, and even before that. So we've acted to do a lot already. There's a lot more to be done.
Catherine Beck says some work is already underway, but parts of it will require legislative changes.
We will need to look to the Ministry of Justice for that. We have been reassured in the past that as soon as they get this and we can put it together, they'll try and slot it as soon as practicable into their parliamentary timetable. But those things take time and they're going to be outside our control.
The Law Society hopes to meet with the Justice Minister Andrew Little early next year to discuss how the changes could be implemented. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Parliament, youth wings of political parties and the Human Rights Commission, they've all had their Me Too moment this year. Almost as soon as the explosive revelations about the behaviour of some lawyers hit the headlines, other areas of working and political life were exposed too. Here's Katie Scotcher with the second part of an RNZ series looking at the Me Too movement.
Less than a month after revelations that interns at the law firm Russell McVeigh were sexually assaulted by lawyers, harassment claims hit the Labour Party's youth wing. Amid intense public scrutiny, Labour's handling of the complaints was reviewed. It recommended a more effective relationship between Young Labour and the Labour Party, a review of the party's code of conduct and its policies on alcohol, sexual harassment, bullying and complaints. Then, 9 months later, news broke that police were investigating a complaint of inappropriate behaviour following a Young National event. The police are investigating. Young Labour, National, Greens and ACT declined RNZ's request for an interview about their members' behaviour and if they made any changes to their groups following the incidents. But Young NZ First Louis Nkabo says the youth wing has made no changes to its regulations.
We feel that they're already ample as it is, but we were told to keep those incidents in mind and to make sure that none of those happen. We've been incident-free, and there's really no indicator that we need to change something in our constitution or in our regulations.
But it's not just the youth wings of political parties in the spotlight. Last month, the Speaker Trevor Mallard launched an external review to get to the bottom of whether bullying and harassment is rife at Parliament. The review, led by Debbie Francis, will also consider sexual harassment.
When I was first here, there were a number of MPs who were Second World War veterans and had a set of attitudes which were firmly of those people who grew up in the 1920s. Now, clearly, attitudes have changed massively in New Zealand in that time, and attitudes within Parliament have changed.
Trevor Mallard says the idea of a review has been around for a while, but events this year brought it to the fore.
It's gone from being something which is sort of like a relatively low-level internal review to being at this level as a result of, the law firm's experiences and the Cox Review.
Late last year, there were questions about the investigation and management of a sexual harassment complaint laid by an intern against a senior staff member at the Human Rights Commission. An inquiry ordered by the Justice Minister Andrew Little later found there was sexual harassment at the Commission, but it was not endemic. The Commission did not respond to RNZ's request for an interview. But here's Acting Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paula Tesorero at the Commission's annual review hearing last month.
This year has undoubtedly been a year of change.
Ms Tesorero says they've implemented a third of the report's 31 recommendations. So what happened to the senior Commission staff member at the centre of the sexual harassment complaint?
Our Chief Financial Officer, at the heart of the sexual harassment claim, continues to work for the Commission. His role as Chief Financial Officer has been disestablished.
Ms Tesorero told the review hearing that the senior staff member would leave the Commission at the end of the month. University of Auckland politics professor Jennifer Curtin says Parliament, political youth wings and the Human Rights Commission aren't necessarily more prone to sexual harassment. The incidents are just more visible.
The thing about public organisations like political parties, like Parliament and like government agencies is that they're subject to much more public oversight than perhaps some in the private and corporate sector where if these things occur, they might be able to remedy them with less public scrutiny.
Professor Curtin says there is often more onus put on public organisations to sort that behaviour out. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher aho.
The Ngāpuhi iwi has voted overwhelmingly against a settlement proposal offered by the government. The Treaty Negotiations Minister, Andrew Little, says 51% of Ngāpuhi individuals voted to support the evolved mandate proposal, well short of the 75% majority needed. Despite a number of hui explaining the proposal across the country and in Australia, the voter turnout was only 19%. Mr Little says it's not the result he would have liked, but he remains committed to reaching a settlement. He spoke to media a short time ago.
The threshold that the various parties I was dealing with set for the vote, which was a 75% individual vote and 72 hapu supporting it, those thresholds were not met. We got 51% in the individual vote. We had 31 out of the 110 hapu prepared to support the mandate, which clearly wasn't enough. So at this point, although there are a number of other sort of mixture of things underlying those results, and I've met with representatives of Tūhoranuku and Te Kotahitanga this morning, as well as their respective advisors, I'm going to just take a bit more time to analyse closely the results and asking obviously Ngāpuhi to do the same. There's a bit of feedback I've been getting out of Ngāpuhi over the last week or so, saying even though people voted against the current proposal, they want to keep the dialogue going and they still want a collective solution. So I will take, in the early part of next year, some time to canvass views amongst Ngāpuhi to see whether there is a basis on which we can continue to proceed to find the basis of agreement so the Crown can sit down with Ngāpuhi and talk about redress for its treaty breaches. So although it's not the result I would have liked, I think there is still something here for us to go on at both Crown and Ngāpuhi. But from the Crown's point of view, as I've said throughout the hui in Ngāpuhi this year, I am totally committed to finding the basis on which the Crown can be held to account for its treaty breaches and to deal with Ngāpuhi on that basis. And I remain committed to finding that.
And that was Andrew Little speaking to the media a short time ago. Anxiety and excessive online gaming are being blamed for more children wagging classes or refusing to go to school at all. Services contracted by the Education Ministry to get children back to school have warned that truancy is on the rise and they're seeing more mental health problems among those children. Secondary principals say their staff are ill-equipped to support children with mental illnesses and they need more help. Here's our education correspondent John Gerritsen.
Reports from attendance services charged with getting children back to school repeatedly cite anxiety and mental health as major and growing problems in the young people they're working with. Carol Puklowski from Auckland City Education Services says mental well-being is a huge factor for 12 to 15-year-old students and it's hard to get the right help.
The capacity to respond to that is just not there, and if you've got a young person who's hiding in the bedroom and doesn't want to get out and if help can't come to the house, it becomes really hard to try and get the right support in place. So mental wellness is becoming really a huge reason for what we're dealing with.
Ms Puklowski says a sometimes related issue is addiction to online gaming.
The other thing that we're finding with anxiety that's impacting us, which is increasing, is addiction to gaming. And of course, if you're up all night playing it, you're not going to get up in the morning. And if you do get up in the morning, you're not going to be very present of mind and falling asleep at your desk.
Richard Dykes from the Auckland Secondary Principals Association says poor mental health is a big problem for teenagers and in many cases schools do not have the right skills or expertise to help them.
Every school will have counsellors, every school will have deans, so there's a whole series of progressions where we provide pastoral care. The demand is going past that and schools are having to tap into outside services and I think the fear of principals is that funding for those services isn't there. And we're feeling a lot more pushback of saying that, you must take these students and you must deal with the issues.
Richard Dykes says too often schools are expected to deal with complex problems and students and their schools need more help from properly funded support agencies. The Associate Education Minister, Tracy Martin, says the government recognises the scale of the problem.
We have a crisis of anxiety in our schools. We have had for a number of years. And that's why in the coalition agreement between New Zealand First and the Labour Party there is about counsellors in primary schools. The young people with anxiety is getting younger and younger and younger and we have not figured out why.
Tracy Martin wants to extend a government-funded trial of counsellors in Canterbury schools to other regions, but there's no detail yet of when or how that would happen. Helen Varney from Auckland's Primary Principals Association says its members are not seeing the impact of mental health problems, but they are running into the after effects of excessive online gaming.
Not necessarily wagging, but definitely late and sometimes very tired. And so when, you talk to the child about, why are you so tired? Did you have a late night? And they'll say, oh no, I went to bed early enough, but I was up playing my game.
But parents are also being told they have a role to play. Helen Varney says they need to have more control over their children's access to phones and other gaming devices. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
And just before we go, some feedback on our earlier story about the sentencing of Rule LaRue, who got home detention after killing a 15-year-old boy in a hit and run. Both sides of the argument here. This person says the young woman ought to spend time behind bars. Despicable behaviour. On the other end of the spectrum, Hera says, I strongly support the judge's compassion with that girl's sentence. That is us for this evening. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you again tomorrow on Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. Emergency services have recovered the bodies of 2 people killed in a plane crash in Raglan Harbour this afternoon. Our reporter Andrew McRae is at the scene.
It's a very small-looking yellow plane, maybe a 2-seater, possibly bigger. Most of it's covered with tarpaulin at the moment, so it's very difficult to see. And this part of the harbour, not terribly far from the Raglan airfield, so it's hard to know whether it was attempting to land or was had just taken off.
Our reporter Andrew McRae at the scene of a fatal plane crash in Raglan. The lawyer representing the teenager who killed a 15-year-old cyclist in a hit-and-run says her client is being threatened at home and online. Last week, Rule LaRue was sentenced to home detention, 250 hours of community work, and was disqualified